The 50-Year Secret, the birthday party I was never invited to. Chapter 1, The Echo of a Forgotten Party. Seattle, Washington, 2024. At 60, my life as an architect was a tapestry woven with threads of success, respect, and quiet fulfillment. My loving husband, Thomas, a history professor, was my steady anchor, and our son, James, a brilliant software engineer, filled our lives with joy. Our home, a minimalist haven overlooking Puget Sound, reflected a life well-ordered, thoughtfully curated. Yet beneath the calm surface, an old wound festered, a tiny, almost absurdly insignificant pain that refused to heal. It stemmed from a single searing memory. Summer of 1974. Evergreen Creek, Oregon. My 10th birthday had just passed. And my best friend, Samantha "Sam" Harper, with whom I was utterly inseparable, had her own 10th birthday party. The vibrant memory of her laughter, the balloons, the colorful streamers fluttering in the summer breeze, all from my living room window. I remembered standing there, a small, invisible figure, watching the other children, our mutual friends, running and shouting with glee, their joyful sounds carried on the warm Oregon air. Sam hadn't invited me. It was a small slight, perhaps, to an adult. But to a 10-year-old girl, it was an earthquake, a betrayal. The girl I had shared every secret with, built countless forts, dreamed endless dreams. She had deliberately, cruelly excluded me. It wasn't just the party. It was the feeling of being utterly worthless, discarded. That day marked a turning point for me. It fueled a quiet determination, a desperate need to prove myself, to build a life so successful, so impregnable, that no one could ever make me feel that small again. My quietness became a shield, my ambition a sword. Years passed, decades. I never saw Sam again after our families moved. But her name, her face, would surface intermittently. Samantha Harper, the celebrated owner of a wildly successful chain of bakeries. Her smiling face graced the covers of business magazines, her success stories lauded in national articles. She seemed the embodiment of effortless charm, of a carefree, joyful existence. And each time I saw her, a familiar prickle of that old, 10-year-old pain would resurface, sharp and immediate. How could someone who had caused such a profound hurt be so seemingly untouched by life's hardships, so seemingly happy? Then one crisp autumn morning, a local Seattle newspaper lay open on my breakfast table, and there, beneath a headline touting a major charity event, was her face. Samantha Harper. She was scheduled to give a baking masterclass right here in Seattle, my city. A complex current of emotions surged through me. The familiar ache of that old wound, yes, but also a potent mix of curiosity, a burning desire for answers, and perhaps a childish, unacknowledged hope for an apology. 50 years, half a century. My rational mind told me it was absurd to still carry such a thing. But the heart, as I knew well, rarely listened to reason. I made up my mind. I would go. This would be our first encounter in 5 decades. The air crackled with anticipation. Chapter 2. The face across the room. The grand hall of the Seattle Convention Center buzzed with the sweet scent of vanilla and the murmur of eager attendees. I stood at the back, a silent observer, watching Sam Harper on stage. She was as vibrant as her magazine photos suggested, her presence radiating an infectious energy. Her blonde hair, untouched by gray, framed a face that still held the youthful sparkle I remembered. She laughed easily, her voice carrying across the room, as she effortlessly demonstrated the art of sourdough. She was everything I was not, at least outwardly. Boisterous, effervescent, completely at ease in the spotlight. The old resentment, the lingering bitterness, began to churn within me. How could she be so bright, so seemingly unburdened? While I, the quiet, disciplined architect, had carried this small, sharp stone in my heart for 50 years, a constant reminder of that excruciating day. As the masterclass concluded, a crowd swarmed Sam, eager for autographs and quick selfies. I waited patiently, a wallflower in a room full of adoring fans. When the throng finally thinned, I took a deep breath and approached her. "Samantha?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's Elizabeth Grant, from Evergreen Creek." She looked at me, a polite, practiced smile on her face. Her eyes, initially holding a vague, polite curiosity, slowly widened. A flicker of recognition, then astonishment, crossed her features. "Liz?" she breathed, her voice a little higher than before. "My goodness, it really is you!" She looked genuinely surprised, a momentary crack in her polished demeanor. But there was no flicker of discomfort, no hint of a remembered transgression, just surprise. We exchanged pleasantries, the awkwardness thick between us. She seemed genuinely pleased to see me, asking about my life, my work. Her enthusiasm was almost disarming. We exchanged contact information, agreeing to meet for coffee the next morning. My heart pounded with a mix of trepidation and a fierce resolve. This was it, 50 years, the moment to finally unearth the buried truth. The coffee shop was quiet the next day, a stark contrast to the bustling convention center. Sam arrived punctually, her smile as bright as ever. We chatted about innocuous things, catching up on the broad strokes of our lives. My architectural projects, Thomas's academic career, James's tech ventures. Sam spoke of her bakeries, her travels, her philanthropic endeavors. Her life seemed to hum with purpose and joy. Finally, I steered the conversation to the past, my voice carefully modulated, betraying none of the tremor in my hands. "Sam," I began, "I know this was a long time ago, but do you remember your 10th birthday party in '74? Sam paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. Then she smiled, a wide, genuine grin that lit up her eyes. "Oh, that party, with the clown and the pony, right? Of course I remember. It was so much fun. My dad rented a pony for rides in the backyard. And the cake was enormous. Mom got it from that fancy bakery in Portland. What a day!" My blood ran cold, my stomach churned. There was no hesitation, no hint of a memory of exclusion, no flicker of guilt. For her, it was simply a happy, cherished memory. I stared at her, utterly stunned. How could she not remember? How could she be so utterly oblivious to the profound wound she had inflicted? A wave of frustration and an even deeper hurt washed over me. "Sam," I said, my voice sharper than I intended, "you didn't invite me. I was your best friend. I was there, looking out my window, watching everyone else celebrate with you." The smile vanished from her face. Her eyes, usually so bright, clouded over. She looked genuinely confused. I didn't invite you? Liz, that can't be right. You were my best friend. Why wouldn't I have invited you? Maybe you were sick? Or I was?" She looked genuinely bewildered, searching her memory. "I honestly don't remember not inviting you. That's impossible. We were inseparable." The conversation stalled. Her confusion seemed sincere. My accusation, for the first time, seemed to genuinely perplex her. I felt a surge of renewed anguish. It wasn't just that she hadn't invited me. It was that it meant so little to her, so utterly nothing, that she couldn't even remember. For me, had been a defining moment. For her, a forgotten detail. I left the coffee shop feeling more wounded than when I arrived. The past, it seemed, was more tangled than I could have imagined. Thomas tried to comfort me. Liz, maybe she truly doesn't remember. Kids. Memories are funny things. It sounds like she really thought you were there. His words, meant to soothe, only deepened my internal torment. How could something so monumental to me be a blank slate for her? The encounter, instead of bringing closure, had only intensified my need for answers. Was Sam lying? Was she truly oblivious? Or was there something else, something hidden beneath the surface of that perfect, sun-drenched memory? I knew then what I had to do. I had to go back to Evergreen Creek, to the ghosts of 1974, to find the truth, no matter how painful. The 50-year secret was about to be unearthed, piece by painful piece. Chapter 3. Footprints in the Past. The journey back to Evergreen Creek, Oregon, felt like stepping into a time machine. 50 years had transformed the sleepy town, yet echoes of the past lingered. The old Main Street had new storefronts, but the familiar bend in the river, the ancient oak tree in the town square, remained. My childhood home was now painted a different color, its porch swing gone. But the ghost of my 10-year-old self still felt present, standing by that window, watching. Sam's old house was there too, still standing on the corner, though its once vibrant garden was now overgrown. It was a tangible link to the past, a silent witness to the events of that summer day. I walked the familiar streets, trying to trigger a memory, a flash of insight. But nothing came. Just the lingering ache of a question unanswered. I knew I needed more than just a walk down memory lane. I needed a living connection. Someone who had been there, who might remember. I started with the logical places, the town library, the local historical society. They were dead ends. Most of the people I knew from childhood had moved away or passed on. Then a stroke of luck. As I walked past the old church, I saw a familiar figure tending a rose garden. Mrs. Carol Jenkins. She had been our elderly neighbor then, a sweet, gossipy woman with a keen eye for local happenings. She was older, frailer, but her eyes still held a sharp intelligence. I approached her cautiously. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'm Elizabeth Grant. I used to live in the house just down the street." She squinted at me. Then her face broke into a surprised smile. "Lizzie? My goodness, is that really you? Look at you, all grown up. What brings you back to Evergreen Creek?" I tried to keep my voice light, casual. "Just visiting, Mrs. Jenkins. Remembering old times." I was actually thinking about the Harpers, Samantha and her brother David. Do you remember them? Her smile faded. Her expression became guarded. "Oh, the Harpers," she said, her voice dropping. "Yes, I remember them. A difficult family, bless their hearts. Especially poor Samantha. She had it rough." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Rough? How so, Mrs. Jenkins?" She hesitated, glancing around, as if worried someone might overhear. "Well, Mr. Harper, Samantha's father, he was a heavy drinker, you know? A very angry man when he drank. And Mrs. Harper, she was always frail, prone to those spells of melancholy, as they called it back then. The house was never a happy one, full of shouting, poor children." A chill ran down my spine. This was a narrative I had never considered. My perfect, carefree Sam, growing up in a house of chaos and pain? Samantha always seemed so happy, I ventured, testing the waters. Mrs. Jenkins scoffed softly. Happy? Oh dear, that child put on a good face. That's what she did. Always smiling, always pretending. But I saw her, hiding in her room sometimes, red-eyed. After that summer, after her 10th birthday, she changed, became even quieter, more withdrawn for a while. Then she just became very, very good at pretending. The casual mention of after her 10th birthday sent a jolt through me. Do you remember anything about that day, Mrs. Jenkins? Her birthday party? Her eyes clouded with a distant memory. Oh yes, I remember the pony and the clown. Such a commotion. But I also remember Mr. Harper got very drunk that morning. There was a terrible row. Things were broken, I heard. And poor Samantha. I heard her crying just before the party started. They rushed to get it all ready, pretending everything was fine. It was a dreadful day for them. A dreadful day. She didn't elaborate, but her words were enough. A seed of doubt, then understanding, began to sprout in my mind. Sam's perfect party, her blank memory, her seemingly carefree demeanor. Could it all be a carefully constructed facade? I knew then that I needed to dig deeper. I couldn't rely on fragmented gossip. I needed facts. When I returned to Seattle, I immediately called Detective Adam Smith, the private investigator who had helped my friend Evelyn with her incredible story. He was discreet, thorough, and possessed a quiet empathy that I now desperately needed. I need to understand what happened to Samantha Harper in 1974, I told him, handing him the few scraps of information I had, specifically around her 10th birthday. I need you to find her younger brother, David Harper. He might have answers. Detective Smith accepted the case, his expression serious. The waiting began again, a familiar, agonizing process. But this time, the emotional charge was different, less about my pain, more about a dawning realization of someone else's. The wound I carried might not have been a direct blow from Sam, but a ripple effect from a much deeper, hidden tragedy. The truth, I suspected, was far more complex than a simple childhood slight, and it was about to change everything I thought I knew about that summer day. Chapter 4. The Brother's Burden. The call from Detective Adam Smith came a few weeks later. He had located David Harper, Sam's younger brother. David was reluctant at first, wary of revisiting a painful past, but after Smith explained the sensitivity of the situation and my genuine desire for understanding, David agreed to speak. Not in person, not yet, but over a video call from his quiet life in a small town in Arizona. As the screen connected, I saw a man in his late 50s, his face etched with a quiet sadness that belied his calm demeanor. He looked nothing like the effervescent Sam. Detective Smith sat beside me, a silent, reassuring presence. "Mr. Harper," I began, my voice soft, "thank you for agreeing to speak with me. My name is Liz Grant. Samantha and I were best friends when we were children in Evergreen Creek." He nodded, his gaze distant. "I remember you, Liz. Sam spoke of you often. You were her favorite. Always." His words were a balm to my long-held wound, but the sadness in his eyes was palpable. "I wanted to ask you about that summer," I continued, bracing myself, "about your sister's 10th birthday party in 1974. Sam, she doesn't seem to remember much about it, or about me not being invited." David's jaw tightened. He took a deep breath, and then the floodgates opened. "That day," he began, his voice low, filled with a raw emotion that had been buried for decades. "That day was a nightmare. Our father, he was a monster when he drank, and he drank a lot. That morning, he got incredibly drunk. He was enraged about something trivial. I don't even remember what. He started smashing things in the kitchen. He destroyed the birthday cake, the one Mom had spent hours decorating. He terrorized the clown who had just arrived. It was chaos. My breath hitched. A clown? A pony? Sam's vivid, happy memories of a perfect party were starkly contrasted by David's harrowing account. Mom, David continued, his voice trembling. She was already struggling with her depression. She just crumpled. And Dad, he grabbed Sam. He dragged her into her bedroom, locked the door. He screamed at her, told her she was worthless, didn't deserve a party. He told her she was just like her mother, weak. He said she didn't deserve happiness. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. This was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. My small imagined slight was a tiny ripple in a vast ocean of family trauma. Then, David's voice hardened. He forced her. He made her come out of the room, wipe her tears, and pretend. Pretend everything was fine. Pretend she was happy. And he made her play with all those children who were already there. He stood over her, watching, making sure she smiled. He wanted to show the world that he was in control, that his family was perfect. It was a twisted performance. The invitations, I whispered, a memory of my unreceived invite, suddenly searingly clear. Why wasn't I invited, David? His eyes met mine, filled with a profound sorrow. Sam wanted you there, Liz, more than anyone. She cried for days about it. But Dad, he wouldn't allow it. He said you were too good. He said you didn't deserve to see our shame. He personally took all the invitations that Sam had written out. He tore yours up right in front of her. He wanted to isolate her. He wanted to control everything. Even her friendships. The truth hit me like a physical blow. The crushing weight of my 50-year-old grievance dissolved, replaced by a profound, overwhelming wave of empathy and grief. Sam hadn't excluded me because she didn't want me there. She hadn't excluded me because I was unimportant. She had been a prisoner in her own home, suffering unthinkable abuse. Her birthday party, a public spectacle of her private hell. My perceived rejection was merely a symptom of her deep, agonizing pain. Her blank memory of not inviting me, her seemingly carefree demeanor, her boundless energy, it all clicked into place. It wasn't forgetfulness or callousness. It was a survival mechanism, a deeply suppressed trauma. Her bright, dazzling public persona, her relentless pursuit of success, was a desperate, lifelong attempt to prove to herself and to the world that she was worthy, that she did deserve happiness despite the horrors of her childhood. I thanked David, my voice thick with emotion. I told him how sorry I was for their suffering. He seemed relieved to finally share his burden, to have someone understand. The phone call ended. I sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. My carefully nurtured anger, my righteous indignation, had been based on a profound misunderstanding. I hadn't been rejected. I had been spared. Spared from witnessing Sam's torment. Spared from knowing the darkness that lurked behind the closed doors of her seemingly perfect home. The journey I had begun, seeking an answer to a childhood slight, had led me to a much deeper, more heartbreaking truth. And now, the path forward was clear. I had to see Sam again. Not for explanations, not for apologies, but to offer something far more profound. Understanding, compassion, and the chance for a shared healing. The 50-year secret, once a source of my own pain, was now a bridge to hers. Chapter 5. The Unburdening. The weight of David's words settled heavy in my soul. Every detail of my imagined slight, every pang of resentment, was now recast in the horrifying light of Sam's childhood. The bright, effervescent girl I remembered had been battling demons I couldn't even fathom. Her constant smile, her drive for success, not signs of carefree joy, but a desperate, lifelong performance to outrun a past steeped in fear and humiliation. I knew I had to see Sam again, but this time not with an agenda of accusation or a desire for apology. My purpose had shifted entirely. I needed to offer understanding, to be the friend she couldn't have, not then, but now. I called her. Her voice was bright, a little surprised to hear from me so soon. "Liz, what a lovely surprise. Everything all right?" "Sam," I said, my voice gentle. "Could we meet again?" I have something important to tell you. Something I've learned about Evergreen Creek, about that summer." There was a slight hesitation on her end. "Oh? Of course, Liz. How about my bakery in downtown Seattle? The one with the rosewater macarons. My treat." The bakery was bustling, filled with the aroma of fresh bread and sweet pastries. Sam, in her pristine white chef's coat, moved gracefully amongst her customers, a picture of effortless charm and success. She led me to a quiet corner booth, her smile warm, yet still, to my newly opened eyes, held a subtle tension. "So what's this big news from Evergreen Creek?" she asked, her tone light, but her eyes held a spark of genuine curiosity. I took a deep breath. There was no easy way to do this. "Sam," I began, my gaze steady. "I went back to Evergreen Creek. I talked to Mrs. Jenkins, and I spoke with David." Her smile faltered. A flicker of something, fear, recognition, crossed her face. Her hand, resting on the table, clenched into a tight fist. "David?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why David? What did he say?" "He told me about your father, Sam, about his drinking, about that day, your 10th birthday." The color drained from her face. Her eyes, usually so bright, became hollow, distant, filled with a sudden, unbearable pain. Her perfect facade began to crack, slowly, irrevocably. She seemed to shrink, becoming the small, terrified girl she had once been. She looked at me, her eyes brimming. He told you everything?" "He told me about the cake," I said softly, watching her closely. "About the clown. About your father locking you in your room. About forcing you to pretend." A sob tore through her, a raw, guttural sound that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. Her shoulders began to shake. She buried her face in her hands, her immaculate chef's coat trembling. "Oh God, Liz," she choked out, her voice muffled by her hands. "Oh God, I remember now. It's all coming back." She wept, not quietly, but with a convulsive, racking grief that spoke of decades of suppressed pain. I reached across the table, my hand covering hers, offering a silent anchor. "I'm so sorry, Liz," she sobbed, finally lifting her tear-streaked face. "I'm so sorry I didn't invite you. I wanted to. You were my best friend. But he wouldn't let me. He took your invitation. He said you were too good to see that." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the horror of her childhood. I was so ashamed. I was so scared. I buried it, all of it. I told myself it never happened. I made myself believe it. My own eyes filled with tears, not of pain, but of profound, aching compassion. The 50-year-old wound, the sharp stone in my heart, dissolved completely. It hadn't been a rejection. It had been a tragedy. I leaned across the table and enveloped her in a tight hug, a gesture that had been lost for half a century. "It's okay, Sam," I whispered against her hair, tears mixing with hers. "It's okay. I understand. I understand everything." In that moment, a profound shift occurred. For Sam, the truth, finally acknowledged, began the long process of healing. The carefully constructed persona of the carefree, successful entrepreneur, while real in its achievements, was also a prison. She had been living a performance, a relentless pursuit of outward perfection to compensate for internal brokenness. She confessed that her boundless energy, her constant need to be busy, to be admired, was her way of outrunning the ghosts of her past. She admitted she had struggled with anxiety and periods of deep sadness, always pushing it down, never understanding the root cause. She decided then and there to seek therapy, to finally confront the trauma she had buried for so long. For me, the journey was equally transformative. The bitterness I had carried for 50 years, the belief that I was insignificant, unchosen, vanished. It was replaced by a deep sense of peace, a quiet understanding of the intricate, often invisible suffering that shapes people's lives. My own drive for success, my guarded nature, had been a reaction to a misunderstanding. I had built a magnificent fortress to protect myself from a wound that was never truly inflicted by the person I blamed. Our friendship, once severed by a perceived slight, was slowly, tentatively rekindled. It was no longer the innocent, carefree bond of childhood, but something deeper, more mature, forged in the crucible of shared pain and newfound understanding. We met regularly, not just for coffee, but for long, honest conversations. Sam began to open up, sharing stories of her difficult upbringing, the hidden struggles behind her public triumphs. And I listened, truly listened, offering the unwavering support she had never received as a child. The day I had watched Sam's party from my window had indeed been a turning point in my life, but not in the way I had always believed. It hadn't defined me by rejection, but by a challenge that, through a circuitous path, had ultimately led me to a deeper truth about myself and the complex, often hidden pain of others. Both of us, finally unburdened, were free from the ghosts of that distant summer day in Evergreen Creek. And in that freedom, we found not just a renewed friendship, but a profound sense of peace and a deeper appreciation for the nuanced, often heartbreaking, tapestry of human experience.